The Russian dictator has again expressed discontent with the past, while Trump's team seeks paths to peace. But can we also add justice to this crucial issue for Ukrainians? We'll get to all of this shortly. I'm Sofia Troshchuk. Welcome to the 24th Channel's YouTube. I'm happy to introduce our guest, political technologist, Mikhail Sheitelman. Mr. Mikhail, greetings and thank you for joining us again. Hello, Sofia. Good morning. Today we'll discuss the international agenda and call out Russian dictator Putin. The day before, he spoke at Valdai and again complained about the past. He said that the misunderstandings, as he calls the current Russian-Ukrainian war, started in 2014 due to decisions of the so-called Kiev regime. It seems to be a favorite of Russian propaganda. The day before, he also mentioned the collapse of the Russian-Ukrainian war and the so-called peace. When it comes to Putin, it's hard to find another word. As soon as the U.S. announced Trump as president, the Russian dictator once again spoke of peace. Do you think it's a coincidence? Or is this statement aimed more at the internal audience than Western countries, or perhaps an attempt to suppress it? No, Putin is no longer addressing Ukrainians. I think he kind of guesses, apparently, that he is not ready to be heard here at all, that his words are not particularly interesting in this sense, and that he is not particularly trusted, to put it mildly.
С одной стороны, да, конечно, он обращается лично к Трампу, просто лично прямо к Трампу. Это раз. С другой стороны, он ведь эту риторику никогда не оставлял. То есть он про это.
But on the one hand, yes, of course, he addresses Trump personally, just personally, directly to Trump. That's one. He's been talking about this world since, May of the 22nd year. And even more so recently, he's just raised this issue dozens of times, showing some non-existent Istanbul agreements, so-called something else. I mean, he always says this, and especially if we're talking about his Valdai speech yesterday, he addressed it directly. The ironic thing here is that Putin seemed convinced Trump was watching him live. We have evidence of this. In the third hour of his speech, while speaking to a reporter, he said, "I'm going to take this opportunity to congratulate Trump on his victory." What did he mean by an occasion? It's clear. He thought Trump was watching him at that very moment. That's the occasion. So, does that mean Trump is watching later on tape, or right now, live? There were other moments, perhaps some indirect messages to Trump, but this was no coincidence. It was intentional. When he said he was taking advantage of the opportunity, he was certain. Without irony, Putin knew his entire speech would be analyzed by the Pentagon, the State Department, and, of course, Trump's transition team. He delivered all his messages to Trump through this speech. Mikhail, I'd also like to discuss the Russian propagandists' glee on August 6th when it was revealed Trump would win the majority, not Kamala Harris. They started celebrating, with one even told to go to sleep, claiming nothing would change. Now it seems Russian propaganda is shifting its focus to the new president. But this is such a peculiar power, because in 2016 they were also happy about it. They were also planning to ride around Moscow with American ambassadors, and in such a short period of time, sanctions against the Russian Federation were launched. Well, it was during the cadence of Donald Trump. Ukraine has received its first armor. Do the Russians have reason to be happy about the 2024 administration change? Yes, but last time they thought Trump was a friend of Russia, which isn't true. They believed Trump and Putin had a strong relationship, but that's false. Trump has no positive relationship with Putin. So, is there anything to celebrate? Sadly, yes, though it's not something to rejoice about, because Trump is certain and few doubt him. That he's going to do it is that Trump is going to pursue a policy of some kind of isolationism, of closure. Make America great again, definitely, in that sense. In what sense? Yes, because this great, that we will not be outward-oriented, but we will rebuild our America, and you will rebuild your own. Unfortunately, it's a fact that this will be the case. So the first thing that the Russians are counting on is that they will stop supplying us with weapons. This is indeed a real risk. It is real, and we have to do something about it, as they say. Although there's not much we can do about it, because the whole story about negotiations and so on is a story that can work both ways. That is, both against the Russians and against us. It's both sharp, it's both dangerous, and it gives both countries chances, us certainly yes, for some successful things. But here's the issue of weapons. Look, Vice President Trump said explicitly that no more weapons will be delivered. It's a direct text that there will be no more aid, that they will stop financial aid to us. We can hardly live without it, if at all. So yes, they do have something to celebrate.
На жаль, пане Михайле, перед тим, як ми детальніше перейдемо до тих 157-48 тисяч планів...
I would like to ask our viewers and listeners to give this story a like.
Російсько-української війни. Я хочу попросити наших глядачів і слухачів поставити лайк до цього стріму, підписатися на YouTube 24-го каналу, на YouTube пана Михайла, він є в описі до цього відео.
We will also be glad if you write where you are watching us from or share your feelings about the American elections, because this topic is still very hot and controversial, and there are probably no more thoughts than those voters who voted at the polling stations. Mr. Mikhail, before we dive into the international press, have your feelings about the elections been confirmed? What interesting details have stood out to you? No, mine didn't come true. I planned 4 years ago that Kamala Harris would win this year. I wrote a book about it. I even wrote a book about it. Well, not about it. I just mentioned in the book in 2020 that Kamala Harris would become president in 2024. I wrote it directly, and it didn't come true, because I saw one vector of development for the world. Let's put it this way, because it was an extra large-scale war. But as it turns out, I found out on election night in the United States that yes, unfortunately, we do find ourselves in the Third World War, that it is an inevitability. It already seems, including the election of Trump. The choice of Trump confirms it. And please note, I don't mean that Trump will start it. No, that's not the point. I'm talking about how the American people see this picture of the world. The American people are crucial globally, as the U.S. is the largest economy, not judged by territory or population. The president doesn't directly lead the people, but rather the states. However, the American people have chosen the direction they believe the country and the world should take over the next 4 years. And so it was a choice between two agendas. Let's put it this way, because Kamala Harris had everything. Well, I mean, she didn't have everything to win the election. She didn't have the ideal starting position for that, and she proposed some agenda, some program, but it wasn't so bright. But that's the details right now. Let's stick to the thesis that it's still a matter of choosing an agenda. So what agenda did Harris propose?
Камала Харрис предлагала какую повестку? Ну, вот ту, к которой мы в последние десятилетия стремились.
Well, the one that we have been striving for in the last decades, especially in Europe. Green energy, equality, gender equality. It was so in Europe. What else is there? I don't know. National equality. I don't even know how to say it correctly. Absence of xenophobia and so on. And there you can add all sorts of things. Tolerance, education. For example, we should all do education now, not something else. This is the agenda that has been reigning in Europe for the last, probably, almost 2 decades, from the mid-20s until now. In America, sometimes it has happened too. That is exactly what happened under Obama, exactly what happened under Biden, and only Trump has been the exception in all this time. Here's the alternative Trump has offered, that our agenda is different altogether. We will press everything we can. We will be self-sufficient. That is, we will go into isolation in the sense that we cannot rely on others. We will produce our own oil, gas, everything. We'll rely on China and produce everything ourselves, using tariffs to protect us. We're no longer trying to help the world. We're focused on survival. Trump's agenda is focused on basic needs, security and food, while higher goals like the meaning of life are secondary. This is part of a larger shift, a premonition of war, though not scientifically proven. It's like the old saying, war is coming when certain signs appear.
Если взять пирамиду Маслоу, то Трамп на более нижних этажах находится, чем повестка Трампа, естественно, личная. Не лично он находится, у него все хорошо. Его повестка – это повестка более низкая, чем повестка Камалы Харрис. И американский народ выбрал более низкую повестку в пирамиде Маслоу. А значит, не удовлетворены его базовые потребности. Потребность в безопасности, потребность в еде, они не удовлетворены. И вот эти верхние, про смыслы жизни и так далее, в общем, сейчас не важны. Вот это называется предчувствие Третьей мировой войны.
That's what the people themselves feel, that the the storm seems to be coming. They start to do something. It's like swallows flying low for rain. Here's the American people felt it. Unfortunately, the American people have every reason to feel it. For example, North Korean troops being in Europe is definitely a sign of World War III. Or the bombing of civilian ships by the Husseinis on a tip-off, that is, on the coordinates given by the Russian Federation. This is certainly a sign of World War III. That is, Somalia strikes British ships based on data relayed by the Russians and Iran's weapons.
Сомали наносит удары по британским кораблям на основании данных, передаваемых россиянами и оружием Ирана.
That's what we've come to, unfortunately. That's what we've come to, unfortunately. You know, Mr. Mikhailo, I caught myself thinking that when I opened my social media page the previous day, particularly on Facebook and social network X, formerly known as Twitter, I saw a large number of journals about the American elections. In particular, Ukrainian military personnel ironically shared their plans for the end of the month because Donald Trump, during his election campaign, promised to end the war in 24 years. Clearly, he didn't reveal his strategy, but after such a decisive victory, it seems his peace plan, or one of many options, is just beginning to take shape. The Wall Street Journal reported that Trump's plan to end the war in Ukraine could involve a 20-year NATO membership freeze and a halt to any territorial returns. In your opinion, with all the theories of conspiracy, all the sharp, decisive, and critical statements about Ukraine or the Ukrainian president, no strategy has been publicly voiced by Trump. What should we expect from these peaceful efforts of, the new administration, which will start there in the spring to fulfill its duties? The best joke, I think, came from Michael Nucky, a Russian opposition political analyst. He's a strong pro-Ukrainian supporter, raising funds for the USU and worth listening to. On his show 2 days ago, he joked, "There won't be a broadcast tomorrow because the war will end in 24 hours. Of course, he quickly returned to reality. The truth is, Trump had no plan to announce, which implies it wasn't a secret. While there was no special plan, the claim that Trump has no strategy is misleading. There is a strategy, but no clear plan. Trump's strategy is simple. Stop the war between Russia and Ukraine at any cost. What happens to territories or past agreements doesn't matter. The goal is just to end the war without letting either side win. That's essentially Trump's strategy."
частности, между Россией и Украиной. При этом совершенно наплевать нам на то, что у них там было раньше, какие у них там территории, какие у них там пожелания. Вот это нам все плевать.
A concrete plan should follow, with clear responsibility, but it appears nothing has been written yet. However, any plan will address a few key points: where to place troops and what political commitments Russia and Ukraine will make. There are no fantastic options, just practical solutions.
Но мы же понимаем, что в рамках этого плана, как ты здесь ни крути, не выкручивай, не может же быть каких-то фантастических планов с учетом прилета инопланетян. То есть любые планы, они...
For example, to say to Ukraine, so we will take you into NATO, but only the part that is not occupied. That's one option. Another option, we will not take 20 years, we will not take 5 years, we will not take any time. Vlasne, there are not so many variants. And really, I've named almost all of them, because there are third and fourth parts. The third is the military component, and the fourth is humanitarian. What will happen to the sanctions? The Wall Street Journal says nothing about this, but it is really very important, because a lot depends on it. If, say, we were forced to end the war on a certain front line, and at the same time lifted sanctions on Russia, it means a total victory for Russia.
Третье, самое важное с военной точки зрения, четвертое с гуманитарной. Вот что будет с санкциями? Вот это в этом Wall Street Journal ни слова про это нет. А это все будет решать. Вот прямо от этого очень много зависит. Потому что разница между нас заставили тем, что не дают оружия, вот взяли и заставили остановить войну на этой линии разделения.
Because we do not recognize anything, even if we are admitted to NATO. Even if we are admitted to NATO, it will still be a total victory for Russia, because it means that we will not return the occupied territories for the next 10 years.
Это значит, что Россия, наоборот, снова будет процветать, запасаться оружием, и через несколько лет не просто на нас снова нападет, а уже сможет воевать на несколько фронтов, потому что Россия, безусловно, продолжит вооружаться, да, и так далее, и так далее. Это если с нее снимать.
This means that Russia will again prosper, stockpile weapons, and in a few years it will be able to fight on several fronts, because Russia will insanely continue to arm itself. It will be a disaster. The lifting of sanctions under such conditions, without returning the territories to us, is one important point, but the main humanitarian issue is, what will happen to the millions of people left in the occupied territories? They say, okay, the territories will be under Russian control, but we won't recognize it. But the people there will remain imprisoned, abused, and have no rights. Russia doesn't respect international conventions or the rights of those in occupied areas. Millions have lost everything, yet no one is addressing this issue.
Которые лишились там всего. И вот про этот вопрос просто никто еще нигде ничего не писал. Никто, нигде и ничего.
That's the second missing element of this so-called plan. Yes, they will come up with something, no doubt. Trump will likely call Putin and say, here's the deal, sign it. And to wrap up this topic, as we say in Lesya Ukrainka's words, we laugh to avoid crying. Trump's approach to ending the war is just populism.
Я для себе підкреслюю, підрискую, як в Лесі Українки, щоб не плакать, ми сміялись, завершення війни за добу. Цей популізм, до якого вдавався Дональд.
And in your opinion, would it be possible to end such a large-scale, huge and crooked war really in a day, given the fact that Ukraine receives bad news from the front, for example, every day?
Зважаючи на той факт, що невтішні новини з фронту, наприклад, Україна отримує ледь чи не щодня.
So, well, in my opinion, of course, you can't end this war in 24 hours. It was all an election ploy. That's a given. There are some skeptics, and for example, a prediction exchange, a cryptocurrency platform, was betting on Trump's victory with a 60% probability. Now, they're taking bets on whether Trump will actually end the war, though the time frame isn't 24 hours. It's understood more figuratively. The bet is that he will end the war by April 20th. But here at the Time yesterday, The probability that Trump could end the war by April 20 was 45%, according to the betting odds, meaning it's the money people are responsible for 45% being quite a lot. So is there such a possibility of Trump ending the war in 3 months? There is. But that doesn't mean it will be good news for us. Well, that's for everyone to decide. Doesn't mean he's going to end it on good terms for us, unfortunately. He has that opportunity, because if we receive all the funding and military aid from the United States, we remember how we fought in the spring. Yes, our military did their best, but there weren't enough shells or HIMARS ammo, which led to losses like Avdiivka. In fact, this Russian offensive began when Congress delayed arms and financial aid for 6 months. The Russian offensive began, and the lack of air defense and thermal power protection is due to the 6-month delay in arms supplies, which left us unable to defend our power plants. Zelensky explained how the Trypillia thermal power plant withstood the entire winter of 2022. Despite weaker air defense at the time, the Russians couldn't bomb it. He said they fired 11 missiles, but we only had 7 anti-missiles. We shot down those 7, but couldn't intercept the other 4 because America hadn't supplied us with air defense. This is how Trump could, in theory, impose peace on us. But now I can only dispel all these as you say, yes, let's make a little bit of good news out of it. It's my deep conviction that it's not going to work out. And it's not going to work out because of one person, not Trump, but it's not going to work out because of Putin. I mean, whatever it is, all of Putin's rhetoric and Putin's behavior say that Putin's main political goals contradict all of this. Putin can say whatever he wants right now, but he doesn't want to end the war. He doesn't. He realizes that if he ends the war, he will personally lose. It doesn't matter what it is, how Russians can celebrate victory and Putin can celebrate defeat, because politically he has nothing to do after the war. He's going to have it very, very bad. He has so ruined the country in all respects, politically, economically, industrially, and so on, that it will be very difficult for him to save himself, personally, from total collapse with this country. That's why the war is his main engine. It's what he's riding on. It's his only car today. He made a huge bet on it after 2022. I mean, it wasn't in the first few months, but when he started mobilizing, further turning the industry around, that's it. That's what it's been for 2 years. If Trump came into office in the fall, then yeah, then he could roll back and say, wow, we won. Everything would be cool for him. But Trump came in the fall, and Putin doesn't have that option anymore. Putin doesn't have that option to end the war.
Тогда да, тогда он мог бы откатить назад, так сказать, забрать какие-то территории, сказать, вау, мы победили, все было бы для него круто. Но Трамп пришел осенью 24-го, и у Путина уже нет этого варианта. У Путина уже нет варианта взять сейчас и завершить войну.
Пане Михайло, я хочу також зачепити ще один цікавий аспект, який ви згадали. Це так звана ізолятивна політика, яку Трамп обіцяв.
Mr. Michael, I also want to highlight another point. The so-called isolationist policy Trump has promised for the next 4 years. This means the U.S. should focus on internal issues rather than external challenges. European officials have been concerned about growing threats from Russia, but have struggled to secure the agreements they wanted.
Від Російської Федерації зростають, але не встигли до цього часу переозброїтися сповна, так як вони хотіли. Ну і зрештою підтримку України.
They have also increased their support to the country at a slow pace, despite all the claims that Ukraine is really protecting not only itself, but also European countries. Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, wrote in his social media accounts a few days before the American elections, Trump or Garris, it doesn't matter. Europe must know how to protect itself. And in your opinion, in view of Trump's policies, and its inclination towards NATO's southern flank, let's say, its desire to reduce funding for the European part of the alliance, will Europe be able to reformat itself in this defense context and really understand the importance of its own security, its own protection, and investments in defense, taking into account its rather shallow, inverted policy from the beginning of 2022? Don't completely discount Europe. It has done a lot. In Europe, there's been a huge increase in military production over the last 2 years. The rearmament of their own armies, everything they provide us with, is also happening. And if we're talking, even President Zelensky said this week that we have more shells. He said of it, and all Western publications that write something about our war, in the spring, the ratio of artillery shells was 1 to 10. Now it's 1 to 2 in favor of Russia. This shift is largely due to European shells, as the U.S. produces very little, only 3,000 shells a year, according to J.D. Vance, now vice president. All other efforts are from military plants in Europe, Germany, the UK, France, and from the Czech president, who provided shells. Military production in Europe is growing daily. Additionally, with France, Finland, and Sweden joining NATO, the defense line against Russia is realigning. Plans for attacking Russia have changed in the past 2 years. If a NATO-Russia war starts, it would now be easier to attack from the north, with NATO units coming from Finland, supported by Sweden. The Baltic states had minimal protection, with only a few American and German troops along the Russian and Belarusian borders, just a few tanks and planes. The Baltic states feared a Russian attack. But now, with Sweden joining NATO, they have a secure rear in Sweden and the Baltic Sea.
F-16 летает в небе Балтии, то есть всего этого очень мало, естественно. И в странах Балтии справедливо опасались нападения России. Но сегодня, когда Швеция вступила, получилось, что у стран Балтии огромный...
The Baltic Sea used to be a sea where Russian warships sailed because Sweden and Finland were neutral.
Швеция была нейтральной, Финляндия нейтральной.
And the next NATO country, it was Denmark. Now that Sweden is in NATO, they've deployed battalions to Latvia. Here, they've also defended themselves. Now, right this week, the largest artillery exercise in many years, NATO artillery exercise, took place in Finland. They were preparing to take St. Petersburg. To take St. Petersburg, not just repel a Russian attack, as the entire Russian army is here. They are focused on training, rearmament, and supplying us. Look at how much money they've provided. 2 years ago, there was doubt about seizing Russian assets, but now they're giving us loans to be repaid by Russia in the future.
Сомневались, арестовывать ли российские активы, а сегодня нам выдают кредит за счет российских активов, которые возвращать будет Россия.
All of this is happening jointly, and the European Union, America, and by the way, Japan are also involved in this process in providing loans. So no, we cannot say that all the others are just inactive and only the US is helping. That is not true. If you look at financial aid, in my opinion, although I may be wrong, all European aid, including financial and military aid, is twice as much as American aid. And then there's financial aid from Japan, South Korea, military aid from Australia, and all of that together makes a huge force. It's not that if the Americans disappear, all is lost. We remember how hard it will be to fight a war without America, but Europe has certainly already rebuilt itself. I can't quantify exactly in numbers how much has changed, but all the European representatives I've talked to believe that Europe is largely capable of replacing America. But there are positions where Europe cannot fully replace America from a technological standpoint. For example, they don't have shells for HIMARS, missiles for TRIO. They don't know how to produce them. They don't have missile hangars for F-16s. All this should have been supplied by America. We have gaps in these issues.
Это уже такой взгляд мой, да, что Ну, нет у них снарядов для Хаймарса, нет у них ракет для Патриот, они не умеют их делать. Нет у них подвесок, там каких-то, в смысле, ракет для F-16. Но это все Америка должна нам была поставлять. Вот тут как бы затыка у нас.
Я, пане Михайле, на завершення нашої розмови хочу поговорити про
To conclude our conversation, I would like to touch upon another rather extraordinary character in world politics. But before we summarize our conversation, I will again ask our viewers to give us a like if you like this conversation, subscribe to the channel 24 and to Mr. Mikhaila's channel, the link to which is in the description of the video. We would love it if you would share your thoughts, because it gives us ideas for future conversations, and write where you are watching us from. And to wrap up, Pan Mihaila, as the cherry on the cake, I want to talk about Viktor Orban, who this month is celebrating, well, not really celebrating, but he met the president of Romania, who even turned his back on him, but that didn't faze him. Orban celebrates Donald Trump's victory and calls on Europe to change strategy. Regarding Ukraine, in light of the fact that Republicans have come to power in the United States, these are the relations between Viktor Orban and Donald Trump, how they can be favorable for the Russian Federation and pro-Russian countries, despite the fact that these two policies, according to the international press, remain quite close and maintain close ties. Donald Trump derives his attitude towards Ukraine and his views on the Russian-Ukrainian war from his conversations with Viktor Orban, who has visited him several times. I'm not sure Viktor Orban matters to Trump. As Stalin once asked about the Pope, how many divisions does he have? Trump likely wonders the same about Orban, and when he learns Hungary's GDP, he'll probably say, take it away, because California's GDP is likely 10 times bigger.
Дональд Трамп, а какой ВВП Венгрии, спросит он, и когда ему ответят, он скажет, да, уберите его, пожалуйста, потому что выяснится, что ВВП, скажем, Калифорнии, я думаю,
Hungary's GDP is actually 20 times smaller than California's, not just 10. So Trump's friendliness with Orban doesn't mean much. He'll talk to anyone, but I don't think Orban is of much interest to him.
Кстати, нет, таки больше, чем в 10, да. Серьезно, да, больше, чем в 10. В 20 раз ВВП Венгрии меньше, чем ВВП Калифорнии. Калифорнии, не Соединенных Штатов Америки. Понятно, что это все было такое, но он же с любым готов при необходимости говорить, общаться.
Trump trusts experts in his entourage who focus on Europe and Ukraine, not Viktor Orban. Orban is elected by Hungarians, but why should Trump care? Orban is a Putin ally, and unless there's a change in Hungary, it will remain on Russia's side, not figuratively, but literally.
На украинско-российскую войну, и вот их он будет слушать, а никакого не Виктора Орбана, потому что кто такой для него Виктор Орбан? Человек, которого выбрали венгры на выборах, в смысле, и почему он должен быть интересен Дональду Трампу? Совершенно не могу.
And Hungary will be on Russia's side, unfortunately. What we haven't decided yet, it's true, we haven't decided which side the United States will be on. We can't say yet, because that's what we'll find out in the coming months, depending on what happens. And if Trump sees that things are really bad, maybe he'll switch to the scenario that he promised. I mean, he said he's going to offer Putin, and if Putin says no, he's going to flood Ukraine with weapons. That's a very realistic scenario, of course. And why not? He wants to increase production in America, and weapons production is also production.
То есть наша надежда на то, что у него ничего не получится. Что он начнет вести, увидит, что все очень плохо, и переключится на то, что он обещал, кстати. Он сказал, я предложу Путину, если он откажется, я завалю Украину оружием. Может быть такой сценарий? Да может, конечно. Реалистично? Да, конечно.
Therefore, this scenario is quite believable.
Он же хочет наращивать производство в Америке, а производство оружия – это тоже производство. Поэтому вот в этот сценарий вполне можно верить.
There are a lot of scenarios. Only time will tell. And we will hope for positive decisions for our country, which requires support from partners from different parts of the world. Thank you, Mr. Michael, for joining us today. Mikhail Sheitelman